Okay, Councillor Coburn, we are now live. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Brittany. Welcome back, everybody. This is a nice day to be able to meet remotely with the weather going on outside, so I appreciate you all being here. We'll call the meeting to order. It's 10:01. And looking at the agenda, are there any additions or revisions that folks would like to the agenda today? Luke.
I just would like to add maybe a little debrief on the briefing on discussion I had with some of the CAT members in Northern Bruce municipality in terms of what they have done themselves as the committee in terms of doing the energy audit as a way to kind of maybe offset some of the costs that otherwise would be incurred by hiring consultants, and just a way to kind of make that, if we get a budget, or if the council makes a budget available, to make sure that that budget gets stretched a little bit. So I can do a 5-minute update on that conversation.
Thank you, that sounds good. Where do we want to put that, Brittany? Do we want to add that to new business?
Yes, please.
Okie dokie. 11.3. Thanks, Luke. Anybody else? Any other additions? No? Okay. I need a motion to approve the agenda with that one addition. Moved by Danuta. All in favor? And that motion is passed. Just a reminder about declaring pecuniary interest now or at any time during the meeting as you see fit. Looking at the minutes of our previous meeting, January 22nd, was there any, I guess we'll need a mover to pass those minutes. Anne, thank you. And is there any discussion about those minutes? Any revisions? Seeing none, all in favor of approving those minutes? And that passes. Thank you. I don't see any presentations or delegations or correspondence. Any questions from the public, Brittany?
No, we did not have any submitted. And if I may, just in regards to presentations and delegations, an update regarding the committee's requested presentation on the Township Biodigester. It has been scheduled for the next meeting of this committee. So when we determine what date that is, our staff will be available to present to you.
Excellent. Thank you. That's super. Okay, moving on to number 10, unfinished business. First up is the committee work plan. Thank you to Luke for updating that and making some changes since last meeting. I'll open that up for discussion, or if Luke, if you feel like giving us an update on that, that would be helpful as well.
Sure, thank you. Well, I basically took the work plan that we previously discussed, and there are some small changes that are highlighted in red, kind of minor issues, but we can briefly run through them to see if they are the right revisions. And so one was on page 8 of the minutes, or of the briefing package, number 3, to develop a municipal climate change vision and goal. And then also, we talked last time quite extensively about an awareness strategy in terms of maybe setting up a website or any kind of other suggestions we had. So we said we need to do that a little bit earlier on in the process. And then on page 9, it is not only, so earlier on we, so to determine it, and then we need to develop it. That's number 5, and then later on number 20, we need to implement it. So there's a number of points in the work plan around the communication and awareness strategy. So first, to make sure that we determine what it actually is, and it also includes, and it goes back to a later agenda item for today. How do we make sure that we actually also focus that both on the public awareness, but also awareness within the council itself? And I think that we'll talk about that slightly later. Also to make sure that we don't run before we can walk. We want to make sure that I think we want to get the council really, we want to get the buy-in of the council before we table something. And then there was some clarification that was required during the last, or some suggestions that were brought up during the last meeting in terms of what is the do nothing scenario. And that do nothing scenario doesn't mean that we don't do anything. It's more about the scenario is what would happen if no action were taken as a baseline, and then more clearly articulate that in terms of what does the action actually mean, so we actually have a baseline to compare our results against. And then yeah, that I think that was these were the main points. So it was the few elements related to awareness raising, and then the other one was more about clarifying what these various scenarios meant. So I don't know if there's any questions about that or any comments. I see this very much as a live document. So we said before, we'll update it every month, see if anything needs to be changed, if anything needs to be checked off. But I think it may serve as a guide to basically say this is how we plan on doing it, and then also in hindsight how we have actually done it. So I think it would also be a very useful tool to say, well, actually we changed things along the way, so that if any other municipalities say ask for a similar kind of exercise, at least we have something to keep, kind of a bit of a template. So I don't know if there's any questions or comments or feedback that would help to clarify this where we are today.
Anne.
Yes, I have one comment, and it's maybe a suggestion for an addition. We've talked about community awareness, and we've talked about kind of making sure that our council has the information they need to kind of stay up to speed. But I also wonder about whether we need to talk about whether there's kind of education or awareness raising that needs to be done with the staff. I have no idea kind of generally where staff are at, and I think they're really, really critical in terms of moving this forward, that they need to have a good knowledge base and understanding of why this is needed.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, Anne. I wonder, Al, do you have a sense for where our staff is generally, where climate action is concerned?
You, Madam Chair. This is something that's on our to-do list for 2021, is really to do a skills assessment of our staff to see exactly where we are in terms of our experience, awareness, education for all staff members, making sure that staff are in the right positions, that they're positioned for success in their roles and responsibilities. So I can tell you that we've got some staff members that are more keenly aware of climate initiatives, of sort of approaching things with a bit of a climate lens, and then we've got some staff that I don't think it even hits the radar at all. So it's part of my 2021 work plan is to do that skills assessment for all of our staff, and then start prioritizing some things so that when we are approaching our priorities list, when we are sort of developing our work plans, that it comes with certain lenses. One is a fiscal sort of fiduciary lens, one is an environmental climate action lens. So there's all these sort of things that we're going to bring as we start to sort of adopt or basically transform our culture within our staff. I don't have an answer for you directly. I don't know, but I can tell you that is something that is certainly on the top of our mind. And if we're going to be successful in our climate endeavors, we need to sort of bring that lens to everything that we're doing, and that's something that we're going to bring forward as part of our cultural change.
Thank you.
That's excellent. Thanks, Al. And I think Anne's right. We do. We want to make sure that all of council and all of staff have an awareness of the importance of the issue in order to be able to move some of these things forward. So thank you. Any other comments on the work plan? Al?
The only thing I'd like to mention is that this is excellent work, and I foresee this sort of as an input into our developing an RFP for a consultant to come in. I very much see this committee as sort of being on the forefront of really developing that scope for a consultant that's going to come in. So I appreciate all this work, and I think it's something that's going to form a very important part of that RFP as we get into the spring season.
Agreed. Thank you. Okay. Thanks again, Luke, for your work on that work plan. I do think it's an important tool to help us move forward and to track the accomplishments. And you pointed out too, quite rightly, that it's something that can be shared with other municipalities so that they're not reinventing the wheel as well. So thank you. That moves us to 10.2. Establishing a vision and mission statement for the Township Climate Action Committee. So I'm just going to say here that I remain confused, full disclosure. So the way the item looks on our agenda, it sounds as though we're developing a vision and mission statement for this committee. I'm not sure that that's how everybody sees it. So I guess some questions around this are, do we need a vision and mission statement for this committee? We already have a mandate per the terms of reference. So is a mission and vision statement needed for us? And if the intent is for it to be for the climate action plan, are we, is this something that we should be doing now, or are we putting the cart before the horse a little bit before we get everyone's awareness and acceptance up to the level that it should be? So I'm just, having asked those questions, I'm just going to open the floor up for some discussion around this item. Comments? Sue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I see this as being not for the committee, but as being for our plan moving forward for Georgian Bluffs and how we are seeing climate action go forward. What's our goal for the municipality? What do we hope to achieve? And sort of a how to get there, so that when we take it to council, we're actually giving them an idea of what the committee is thinking of moving the township toward. So maybe I'm not explaining that well, but I don't see it as being for the committee. I see it as being for the actual plan.
Okay, thank you. How do we feel about the timing of this? Do we feel like now is the right time to develop a vision and mission statement, or do you think we need to do some work first in terms of acceptance with council and staff before we get to outlining these? Any thoughts on that? Anne?
I think doing some work with council and staff makes sense. I also wonder if it would be good to have our energy and emissions audit completed so we have a sense of what our baseline is. And from that, kind of establish some goals and what we're trying to achieve. I feel like we're trying to create something without enough knowledge at this point. I mean, we know what our mandate is. I mean, our mandate is to create a climate action plan. To refine it more than that at this point without that input, I think is a bit challenging.
Any other comments or thoughts? So seeing, oh, Bob.
Bob, unmute.
I think I'm there.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say that it seems to be a bit tricky to develop these vision and mission statements. I spent a day just fishing around on the internet looking for different examples and definitions and that sort of thing. And, you know, there's probably consultants that make a living doing these things. You know, it's not easy, but yeah, I think at some point in time, we're going to have to grapple with it. And I don't know whether that's before we get a consultant on board or not, but we'll have to provide some pretty good direction somehow. And it's not going to be it's not necessarily an easy thing. And goals are something else and objectives are something else. You've probably all been around the horn on these things before, and they're all important. It's once they're clarified, I think it really helps to provide a good solid basis for what goes forward, but it's just a difficult thing to do. So we just have to be really clear in terms of what we're wanting to do.
Yeah, I agree, Bob. I think it's been a useful exercise, at least for me, to sort of, as you say, get online and look at what other municipalities who are a few steps ahead of us have done and what their goals and vision statements are. But I wonder if it's okay with the committee if we can table that for now. We have it in the minutes so we can refer back to it. And then when we get a little further down the road, we can come back to that and make some more recommendations, especially if we get working with a consultant in the next little while. Luke?
I agree with you, and I was thinking maybe there is an in-between place as well, and kind of a hybrid in terms of not defining what that vision, mission, and purpose should be like, but it actually provides some helpful input for discussions with the council and staff in terms of the broader picture. This is what we try to achieve, and let's not lock it in. I think there's also probably we probably would like to have some public input. But I do think it provides some useful speaking points, by lack of a better word, in terms of saying this is what we're after, especially for those to whom this is all very new and wonder if there is a new monster coming out, and to say no, this is it should make common sense, and these are the elements. We haven't decided on what the final objective and the vision statement is going to be, but this is the big picture. So in that way, we can also use it a bit in our engagement to test what actually resonates and what doesn't resonate. Because if the vision becomes too abstract, then we lose people. And there may be a number of people that say, listen, if you can't explain it in one sentence, don't come talk to me. And that will be very helpful feedback as well, right? So maybe we could test it as part of the engagement that we will do in the meantime.
I agree. Do you feel like we have some of the verbiage in order to do that at this point? Or do we have to refine something further? Sorry, Luke.
Well, I think it's probably part of I think I would see the first step for engagement is with the councillors, and that's on the agenda for today. And I think that discussion will probably help determine where you have a much better sense about where the various councillors are and what is required to actually make them more comfortable with the topic, and what language does resonate, what language doesn't resonate, what's the tone, what's the style, and maybe that would then also help us kind of refine a little bit what the proposed vision statements could look like. But I think it's all probably moving in tandem a little bit as we try to kind of become more familiar with what's the narrative around this issue? How do we talk about it? What words do we use? What words do we not use? What are things that make people excited or at least accepting the issue? What are complete turn-offs? I think that is really kind of making it much more specific to the key stakeholders we're dealing with. So, yeah.
Agree. Other comments, Al?
Just if I may, I think what we're having some growing pains here is I think everyone's very passionate on the topic. Everyone's very engaged. Everyone wants to sort of jump ahead and move forward and get sort of more onto an operational sort of working group here. And I think it's, we need to define this role, and I think it'll help once we sort of get our heads around the fact that, these are all people around this table here that are very passionate, want to do the very best, and The role is really from a guidance and advisory capacity. And I think that's where we sort of need to sort of define this committee. We're going to define the rules of engagement. We're going to sort of define the overall sort of strategy here. And then it's for staff to work with our consultant to really define what that work plan is going to be. And this committee continues to sort of do an oversight and an advisory and making recommendations to council. But I think there's sort of a robustness and sort of a desire to get into the weeds now and start to do some operational things. And I think that's where we sort of have to make that definition and that clarification. And I think this is a great group. I think you love the passion, you love what's happening. It's now let's define sort of that overall sort of advisory role for this committee. Then let's bring on the consultant. Let's get council to adopt all of these things in terms of the overall vision and what the benefit this committee is going to bring to it. And then you have sort of the work plan defined, and then we continue as staff to bring back our successes, our challenges, our opportunities to this committee and ask for advice and seek your guidance as we move forward and operationalize the plan.
Thank you, Al. Any thoughts or comments on that? I do see this as a very keen, very knowledgeable, very hands-on kind of committee, which I think is great. I think there are opportunities along the way where our committee can offer input. So even into what the RFP looks like for a consultant, or perhaps even with the hiring of that consultant. And the steps along the way. So I want to make sure we're using the expertise and the motivation of these committee members. And as you say, Al, at the same time, defining where our role starts and stops and where staff's role is, and also the rest of council. Okay, so we'll leave vision and mission statement. Is that what I'm hearing for now, Luke?
Well, just very briefly, I think this is actually very helpful because I had some discussions with some of our colleagues in terms of, what is actually, we know the mandate of this group, but indeed we had a bit of a discussion about, are we kind of cheerleading the council and staff in terms of your role in bringing this forward, or to what extent does the committee actually get involved in the actual work? So I find this actually very helpful clarification, just to be very clear. The role of the committee is more guidance and advisory, and then supporting staff to work, that staff works with the consultants to actually drive that whole process. I think that's a very, I think it was implicitly understood, but I think it's very nice to make it very explicit so that we all are very clear about also what are the boundaries of what we can do as a committee, right? We're not driving the bus. Staff and the consultant drives the bus, supported by or instructed by council. That's very helpful. And then if we serve in this advisory role and also do some background work that focuses on our collective knowledge, for example, it would be helpful maybe from time to time for some of us to say, well, in our network, maybe there are some particular experts that could contribute to the process that staff and the consultants are working on. So indeed to kind of, bring people in and benefit from the wider network we have access to. So just support what you just said. I think it's very helpful.
Thank you. I agree. All right. Good discussion. Okay. So we will not, we'll leave 10.2 for now and come back to that later when we're a little further down the road. The next item under unfinished business is an article. Anne, I believe you had requested that be circulated. Did you want to speak to that article a little bit for us today?
Actually, I think it was Sue that circulated that article, and it feels like it was a while ago now. And the reason I tabled it was the fact that the University of Guelph had a number of professors and students that were involved in writing that article in conjunction with a team from Simon Fraser, I think. And it left me thinking that a lot of their focus was on rural communities. We are a very rural community. Would there be any value in reaching out to that particularly University of Guelph team to say we're just at the kind of baby steps of entering this? Would you be interested in having us be a sample site for some research, which would result in maybe getting some assistance? Or is there a student doing their PhD that would be interested in interning with us? So that was more the question about the article. It wasn't so much the specifics of the article as the fact that the University of Guelph was very active with it. We have a lot of young people from this community that attend the University of Guelph as well.
Agreed. Yeah, it certainly is a university that a lot of our locals go to.
Mm-hmm.
So, Sue, you have a comment.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Where that article came from, Jay Maloney, that's listed there, had somehow got my name and called me to do a survey about green infrastructure within our community, and he had a lot of questions about it. So then he shared that document with me. So it was quite interesting doing the survey because I realized just how very little I really know about some of the things he was asking. But it was interesting, and he's going to share with everyone who did the survey what the results are when they have it complete. So I'll have that at some later point. With the idea of connecting with them through University of Guelph, Ashley Whedon, that is listed there, actually used to work for County of Grey and is from this area. So she might be a good one to reach out to. So
it's a great idea. Al, do you see that as something you might be able to help us with? I know that you've been considering reaching out to students in other capacities within the municipal work. How do you feel about following up with that a little further?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, I think it's a great idea. I think there's a lot to be learned from each other and sharing of ideas, and they will open a lot of sort of ideas that we had never even thought of. So between Brittany and myself, we'll reach out and we'll see if there's some members of that group that could perhaps be prepared to join us at a future meeting and sort of share some ideas, and we can bounce some things off of them as well, and they can help us sort of define what this roadmap for Georgian Bluffs is going to look like.
Perfect.
I think it's an excellent idea.
Thank you. All right, any more discussion on this particular item, Anne?
Just one other point, and that is the University of Guelph has a very strong agricultural focus, and I know that a lot of Georgian Bluffs emissions come from agriculture, so I think that link would be a really good one for us.
I agree. That's a good point. Thanks for bringing that forward, Sue. And when you hear some of the results of the study down the road, we'll look forward to hearing that. Yes.
thank you. I'm glad Anne brought up about the agriculture because I picked up this book. I don't know if everybody can see it. Food is the Solution, What to Eat to Save the World. And it's actually was published March of 2018, so it's not very old. And it's $4 in at the dollar store on the west side. So it's just full of information about plant-based eating. And it actually, in a recipe, will say, if this uses a pound of ground beef, this puts this much climate-changing CO2 back into the air, where if you make it with lentils, it's only this much. It's really interesting to read. And I question how far we can push that agricultural sector in this municipality, because it would be a huge savings in greenhouse gases and such, but it's a lot of people's living. And there's a couple of them in council, especially, that would maybe frown and seeing that pushed very far. But I'm glad Anne brought up agriculture.
I'm sure that'll be part of the equation as well, for sure. My son was home for a month and he's vegetarian, so I committed hard to cutting meat out of my diet for a month, and it was not as bad as I anticipated. Anne?
Just, I want to comment. Luke mentioned the people that we have kind of behind us that have expertise. We have somebody within our group that has huge expertise in farming, agriculture, and climate change. And he could actually speak to the meat issue, Sue, in terms of there are actually some climate friendly ways of raising meat. So you don't have to cut it all out, but it's more how you do it.
Yeah, those are all good points for sure. Okay. If there's no more discussion on that point, that article, we can move into new business, 11.1. So I just wondered if we needed a little debrief. This item is at my request as a follow-up to the presentation provided to council around climate change. And I bring this up because I did hear from a couple of councillors afterwards who I think were left feeling maybe as though they had more questions than answers, and I don't see that as a bad thing at all. But what it does indicate for us is that maybe we have a little more work to do in helping council maybe understand the issues a little bit better. This is new for some people, and it's really still new for me as well. So I just wondered if we need to chat a little bit now about how we can help council better understand the issues as a follow-up to John's presentation. Any thoughts on that? Danuta?
What about a panel presentation? If we can get John there in future and some other people, so they can ask questions. Do you think they would want to do that? That way it can be focused where they want it to be focused.
I think that sounds like a great idea. Yeah, letting them lead the conversation and maybe even submitting questions in advance. I'm just logistically, Brittany might be ready to tear her hair out at the thought of having doing this virtually. It's so tricky, but so how do the rest of you feel about that? Is that something that we need to bring forward, Sue?
I think it's a great idea. Would we do it as part of a council meeting though, or do it as a special meeting so that that's our only focus is on the climate action and what we're proposing for council, and open them up to asking questions that way? Like not try to fit it into 15 minutes during a council meeting.
That's a good suggestion. Thoughts on that? Al, how do you feel about that process?
I would say the following, through you, Madam Chair. Our current draft budget right now that is being developed for council's consideration includes a placeholder for climate. Specifically, as we talked about previously, what we are going to be telegraphing to council is that we think about $150,000 over the next 3 years to get this up and running and start to actually do some work and start reducing our emissions as a municipality and start spreading the word as an educational and awareness program. For 2021, there's $50,000 currently in the draft budget that council is going to consider. My suspicion is the following, that when council sees the entirety of the budget and all the pressures that are going to be facing them in regards to, decaying infrastructure, all the various things that are coming, it's going to be a challenge for council to prioritize the list of requirements. And as such, I think it's well worth the investment if this is deemed to be a priority that we educate our councillors before the budget session, so that when council is sort of in the midst of deliberations and they have to make some important decisions between priority A or priority B, my suspicion is they will go with what they're most familiar with and what they can understand, and that if we fail to educate them in advance of that, there's a danger that they will say that this isn't a priority for 2021. Let's look at it for 2022. So I think it's important that we brainstorm as a committee in terms of how that messaging is best sent to council in advance of budget deliberation, so that when the item comes in front of council, they understand what the request is for. Now, what that mechanism is and how we do it, I think we need to put our heads around that. I think the opportunity to have a Q&A session so that councillors can ask questions is certainly an option. I think you need to be a little more sort of proactive with this and really communicate to council sort of the dangers of not doing anything, the benefits of doing what we're doing. So I think we need to be a little more proactive with that to help that education and awareness of councillors.
Thanks, Al. I agree. And I wonder if there's something we can do before a panel session. So I guess in my mind, I was wondering, and I know we can't direct you to do anything, Al, but I was just wondering if a report needs to come forward from our CAO, perhaps on behalf of the committee, that outlines the benefits of taking climate action, as well as the pitfalls if we don't. And it's interesting that you should talk about decaying infrastructure, because that ties in really nicely with climate change. Municipalities are seeing now, with a lot of their buildings being built, I'm going to say in the 50s, maybe 60s, we are needing to make some big decisions about those facilities. And so when you do the reading with climate action, they talk about how to deal with that specific issue, for example, and how you can do that in a climate friendly way. And that, you know, the lens that we use around climate change has to start seeping into every decision we make as a municipality. So it's not like this is a project aside from everything else we do. It's part of everything we do. You know, how do we manage those floods that we see on the roads every single year, more than once a year? And, you know, all of those operational decisions and how we build up our roads and divert stormwater, that's all part of the discussion around climate change. So, Al, I guess I'm asking you, would it make sense for a report to come forward prior to the budget discussions that kind of ties the work of this committee together and gives council some information as to why we need to consider this amount in our budget this year? Sure.
To the committee through the chair, absolutely. I mean, we can certainly draft something together. I think it's what we've talked about in the past. It's a mindset. It's not only the roads and our facilities. It's chemicals that we purchase to clean our buildings. It's that whole sort of green lens. It's from a procurement perspective. If we're going to hire certain contractors, are they certified in terms of climate action and certain initiatives and different things? Do they, you know, if we're hiring someone who's going to do some clear cutting to do a road, do they have some policies in place where for every tree that they cut, they're going to plant another tree? Those types of things that we can sort of incorporate into our overall strategy, from procurement to operations to capital planning. And so we can certainly put something together. I'm just cognizant of the timelines. We're currently scheduled to give council sort of a budget preview, not the budget presentation, but a preview of what's going to sort of some of the challenges council's going to have. I believe it's, Brittany can correct me, I think it's February 17th. Okay, February 17th. So we're going to have an item on our committee of council meeting where we're just going to be providing council and the public sort of a budget overview, some of the pressures that we're encountering. You know, if money was no objective, here's all of the list of everything that we would require, so that council can see a holistic view, and included in that will be a climate item as well. So it might have to be after that, but certainly before we go back to council. I believe council is scheduled to start budget deliberations either late March or early April. We're trying to align a bunch of things, including the airport feasibility study, the organizational and compensation review that's currently ongoing, because we see these as all inputs into the budget, so that when we present council sort of that overview, we've got all those inputs in there. I don't want to go to council and say approve this, and then 2 weeks later now we've got something different that we should have added to the budget. So I'm just trying to see, it'll probably be after February, but before the March budget deliberation. So we'll target something towards the end of February, beginning of March. As a draft report, I will certainly circulate it to this committee for your input and consideration, and then with Brittany's help, we'll add it to an upcoming agenda for council's review and start to plant the seeds with councilors.
Does that sound like a good approach with everybody? Okay, excellent. Danuta.
I was debating as to whether or not to mention this, but and maybe it's my own sharp eye that sees these things. But when I did the budget survey, climate change was on the list of all the other priorities. And that was something I noticed right away. It's seen as a separate thing. So that told me a lot about where we're at.
Yeah. Yeah. Beginning stages for sure. Other comments, Anne?
Yeah, I think the idea of doing a report on kind of the risks of not doing anything, and that should include the cost of not doing anything, as well as the potential savings of doing stuff, is really, really important. So I really appreciate Al tackling that. I also wonder if it would be worthwhile checking out the PCP and the BARC websites, as well as the Nature-Based Solutions website that was circulated last week, for some examples of what some municipalities are actually doing. Because I think there's a need to make this feel real and doable rather than just words. And some of the videos that I've seen and some of that, I think might be really useful tools to help the council members see that, yeah, this is doable in Georgian Bluffs. This is not necessarily a big city issue. There are things that we can tackle here that are very doable. Now, I know that in the roadmap that Brittany presented at the last meeting, joining PCP and BARC were on the list, and I don't know whether that's happened yet or what the plan is for that. But I know that once Georgian Bluffs is a member, we can access a lot more information from them. And I'm wondering whether it would be useful to start looking at doing that sooner rather than later, because I think some of the tools and information they have might be useful in kind of working with council in terms of the importance of this issue.
I agree. And I believe PCP is the one that's free. So
yes.
I don't see the, pardon me?
But you have to join.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So if I may, through the chair, we will certainly get on that. And I will include that as part of the report to council to inform them of the initiatives that we're taking and sort of the organizations that we're planning on joining to sort of keep Georgian Bluffs on the cusp of what's current and be able to share some of those success stories.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think sometimes as a council, we feel a little like we're in our own little silo, and I think it is important to hear how other municipalities that are similar in nature to ours have already moved forward with this, so that it doesn't feel like it's, you know, totally new and strange. Other comments? Just in follow-up to Anne's, I know FCM and Sue will be aware of this as well because she did the climate leadership course, but FCM has a lot of material and a lot of their case studies are smaller rural municipalities. And so we can draw on those by way of example too. I think a lot of it is reassurance that we're not, this is not going to be, you know, a project that's going to sink us financially, or I think there's a lot of fear that farmers are going to have to totally change the way they do things, and there are going to be barriers for developers. And I think we really need to start alleviating some of those fears because they're real and they won't go away if we don't address them.
Yeah.
Luke.
So to follow up on that, I really like that you said it, because I think we need to address some of the elephants in the room, and they're real concerns. And also, councillors have their own constituencies, and you probably all get inundated by questions to say, you know, what is this climate change business all about? And you know, you're not going to change the way we live. So I wonder if there is also building on the observation that there was, you know, after John's presentation, there was relatively limited feedback. I wonder if we can think about a safe space by which some of these concerns are actually put on the table, and even to say for some council to say, I don't even know what questions to ask, because I'm new in this topic, and I don't want to embarrass myself through a public forum where I may feel a bit funny about some questions, and therefore I'd rather not ask the question. And I don't know how to do that, but one of the suggestions when this question came up from other municipalities, I wonder if there's a way by which, and I don't know if it's actually appropriate, if you can do it from how the council operate, but if there is an opportunity for some councillors to talk to councillors in other municipalities and to say, listen, you went through this. Tell me, these are my concerns. Does it change the way by which farmers now have to farm? And to basically have a peer coaching session, or a peer, you know, kind of a safe space to say, listen, I came from the same perspective. This is a journey that we have gone through, so that we take, I wouldn't say the fear factor out of it, but to demystify what it actually means in practice. Because I think even us on the committee, we don't know. We haven't gone through this yet. We are on the journey all together. But it would be very helpful, I think, if we could find some councillors who maybe were at the same place, but they said, listen, we started from scratch, and these are some of the things you are that you have to be concerned about. This is the reality, but there's also another side of it. So that hopefully then allows some of the councillor, and again, maybe I'm speaking a bit out of line here, but maybe it allows some of the councillor to feel more prepared than to come to a panel and then to say, okay, let's talk about these issues, because I've done some more thinking about it.
Right, those are really good points. And as you're speaking, Luke, I like the panel discussion or connecting people that way to answer questions, but I'm also thinking, Brittany, I wonder, and the rest of you, if sending out a survey, just a quick survey to council members, like a SurveyMonkey or Google survey that's anonymous and confidential, to get at where they are on this continuum of climate change acceptance and understanding, and give them an opportunity to ask those questions in a safe kind of forum, so that we have a better finger on the pulse regarding our own council members, which I don't know if Sue can comment, but I certainly don't have a good sense of where individuals are at with that. So is that something that might be considered? Is that a good idea? And then we can, once we know where the council members are at, and maybe even staff, then we have an idea of how to move forward and what concerns to address. At the same time, I don't want to slow down the process any. So comments, Anne, I see your hand is up.
Well, I was just thinking when you mentioned survey, Kathy, this committee all did that survey that John recommended to kind of tap into what people's thinking is, knowledge base, worry level was regarding climate change. And I mean, there's already a ready-made survey out there that could be used.
I think it is a useful survey. I don't know that it goes far enough. I think what we need to know is that one gives you kind of a snapshot of where they are on the acceptance and understanding continuum, but what I would like to know is, what are your specific concerns? Are you concerned about the impact on the agricultural sector? Are you worried about losing development opportunities? And that's the one thing that survey doesn't get at. It could be, we could use some of those questions as part of a survey, but I personally kind of feel like we need a little more detail from it. Brittany?
Thank you. So I think all of these ideas are really good ideas. I think for now, if the committee is okay with it, leave this with Al and I so we can see what options would work best for our council. I think a survey is a really good idea, both for council and staff. I think what would also be beneficial is reaching out to Huron-Kinloss and see how they handled the beginning of implementation of this plan and how they gathered feedback from their council and how they addressed any kind of concerns that their council may have had. So leave it with us for now. We'll come back to the next meeting with some suggestions in collaboration with the staff at Huron-Kinloss to see how we can better approach this.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you, Brittany. Al?
Yeah, if I may, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would say the following, based on my discussions with council members and staff members to date on climate change, I'm going to summarize it as follows. I think Luke was onto something. I don't think there's any sort of desire not to do anything from an environmental perspective. I think the fear is that it's going to become a money pit. And is there a return on that investment? And I think part of what I will need to do in my report is sort of try to alleviate some of those concerns, because the sense that I've got from folks that I've talked to is, yes, this is great. Yes, this is great that we got to try to do something, but how much is it going to cost, and what's the return going to be? And so I think I need to address some of that in the report, because I think that is sort of the underlying sort of giving someone a pause for thought when they start going down this path is, oh my goodness, what is it going to cost the municipality? So I'm gonna try to tackle some of that in the report.
Super. Thank you, Al. Other comments or suggestions? And I think if we do a survey down the road, we should have two separate surveys, not to try to do one that fits the needs of council as well as staff, but again, that's down the road. And you had your hand up.
I know that there was discussion about grant opportunities to do this work, and that might be useful as well in the report, so that council can see that it's not all on their taxpayers kind of fund.
Yeah, good point.
Thank you.
Al?
Thank you for that, pointed through you, Madam Chair. I mean, it's something that we're looking at. I've got a report that's likely going to come to council in the fall. We've already started to have some preliminary discussions with groups that are out there who simply function to mine all available grants from other levels of government. It doesn't cost the municipality anything if they're unsuccessful. If they are successful in getting us grants, then the funding model is that we will pay them a certain percentage of what they get us. So there's no risk for the municipality in terms of engaging these firms out there. They will put their business case together. They will submit the grant application. They will work on our behalf. And if they're successful in getting money from other levels of government, from utility companies, wherever those grants are, and Georgian Bluffs gets that, then we pay them a percentage of what they give us. And so we're working on all that right now. The reality is, and I'm just let the committee members know, and I think councillors on the committee already know, is, we don't have staff members right now who sort of have that additional capacity to start mining grants and writing grant applications and all the time that it takes to do that research. And so I think this might be the best use of our sort of available resources, is to outsource that function and only pay for that specialty when we're successful in getting some funding, whether it's on the climate action front, whether it's on a heritage front, a recreation front, a seniors front, you name it. They're going to mine all of that on behalf of Georgian Bluffs, and we're going to move that forward. I just need some time in terms of getting our foundational pieces set first, because sometimes you careful what you wish for, because if you do get sort of money flowing in, and oftentimes there's a requirement where we either have to match that funding or provide a third of that funding. They have to be shovel ready, or they have to be completed by a certain date. Sometimes, you know, the worst thing that can happen is that you're successful in getting that funding for your grants. And so I just need to make sure that the foundation is ready, and that's why I'm going to be waiting until the fall to make sure all of our resources are in place. Everyone knows what they're doing. Everyone's assigned a specific task. So when those grants go out there and we're successful in getting them, we're prepared and we're going to act on them. So thank you very much for that, and I'll certainly add it to the report.
Excellent. Thank you. Any further discussion on this particular topic? Okay, let's move on. The next item of new business, 11.2, is asset management. So the requirement to include climate change in our asset management, and that's a conference series. I'm not sure, Brittany, is that something you can speak to, or is that Al's item?
So between both Al and myself, I think we can cover this one. So this had been forwarded to both Al and myself from the deputy mayor, so correct me if I'm incorrect in saying that, as a potential educational series, both for yourselves and potentially for our council members as well, given our 2021 ambitions of addressing climate change. Currently, I will say our council remuneration policy does not cover committee appointed members, being community committee appointed members. So currently, as it stands, should you wish to attend this conference, it will be at your personal expense. I can handle registration for you. However, covering of the cost does come at an individual cost. Not to get too ahead of myself, but we are proposing that potentially be amended. That report has not yet gone to council, but we are suggesting that we do include community appointed members in the council remuneration policy. At this point, though, that is not the case. So, Al, do you have anything to add?
Thank you, Brittany. No, to the committee, I mean, it's something that we're exploring. We've got a draft report that's going to be going to council for consideration, I believe, at the next committee of the whole meeting next week, I think. And so that'll become public on, I guess, later on today. The agenda will become public and you can see the report. But the recommendation is really sort of trying to modernize the current remuneration policy without sort of making any significant changes, because we're also cognizant of the fact that this was a citizen committee that made these recommendations for this term of council. So we want to stay true to that. But I think it's important that we sort of allow committee members who are taking their time to sort of help guide the municipality. It's not going to be a lot of money. We have to stay within our fiscal challenge, but we're hoping that council allows committee members the opportunity to access some funding that will be approved by council, so that if opportunities arise and there's benefits to it, committee members will be able to attend certain seminars or conferences. It doesn't mean that you sort of get a free pass. What it means is going to be some obligations on you to sort of bring it back and share with the committee what you learned and what we can benefit from it, so that we can confirm that there was a return on that investment. Because I think we have to be transparent to our taxpayers and our ratepayers, so that, you know, if we're going to move forward and sort of adopt this going forward to the future terms of council, it's something that we can confidently say to our ratepayers that there's the benefit to sort of doing this. So we're working on that. I will also say, in regards to our overall asset management plan, this is something that we are, as a municipality, still doing some work on. I mean, I'm not sure we're there yet in terms of having that defined plan. Specifically, when I look at asset management plans, you have to have all your condition audits completed. You have to have sort of then a 10-year capital forecast that then tells you how you're going to sort of address all these asset plans. You sort of embrace then sort of that green environment, so that if you know, if you've got a community center which is sort of on its last legs and you're going to recommend a retrofit, well, then have you incorporated all of the greens, or you're doing some gray water systems? You're looking at putting some solar panels in there. You're trying to get it off the grid? Are you trying to reduce the environmental footprint of that facility? So these are all things that have to go in, but in order to have that, you sort of have to have council approve your guidelines and your minimum standards, so that when we go out for an RFP, typically what happens when you're retrofitting a building, for example, we'll use that as an example, you sort of live within a budget that council approves. You start going out and getting some contractors, you start getting some bids, and what you realize is you quickly start to do some value engineering, because oftentimes the bids come in above your budget. You either haven't defined the scope properly, and what often happens is it's the green sort of environmental things that sort of get chopped off first, because you're trying to live within a budget. And so it's part of establishing those minimum guidelines, those minimum standards. When you go out to your consultants or you go out to your contractors, they don't have the opportunity to back out. Right now, you don't have an opportunity to back out for accessibility standards. We need to make it so you can't sort of back out of environmental standards as well. It's a standard that has to be maintained and kept, and that's at the very least. So whether it's LEED Gold, LEED Platinum certification that you're going to do, you don't allow the contractor to value engineer accessibility functions out of a building. We have to do the same thing in terms of our environmental sort of standards as well, and make sure that that isn't an option where you sort of value engineer that out. So as part of that whole asset management plan, as we're developing that, as we're going to have council adopt it, it won't be for this year's budget, but it will be later on this year, because council will have the distinct pleasure of having two budgets to go through this year. Not only will they be doing 2021 in the next little while, but they'll also be doing 2022 before the end of this year. And what we're proposing, I hope at that time, is council will actually be able to see a multi-year operating budget and a 10-year capital forecast, so that council can see all of these things that are happening. They can see the green initiatives happening. They can see how, when we're retrofitting buildings, what we're going to be doing. If we're talking about doing some road widening or new roads, how we're going to incorporate some of that green into that, and that'll be sort of our new standards going forward. But that's something that's coming later on, and I'm sure it'll be something that the consultant will put together as part of our work plan later on this year.
Excellent. Anne?
I just want a clarification. When we're talking about asset management, are we talking about buildings as assets, or what? How do we define assets?
Wow.
Through the chair, assets is much more than building. Assets are bridges. Assets are our IT assets. Assets are our roads. So it's everything that we have. So part of the responsibility that the municipality has is keeping our assets in a state of good repair. And so it's having a financial plan that incorporates how you're going to do that. It's, that at the end of street lights, for example, if they've got a life cycle of every 20 years they need to be replaced, how do you sort of do that in a financially responsible way, whether it's adding a little bit every year to a reserve, so that when year 20 comes and those lamp posts need to be replaced, you're not going out to the taxpayers and having a big sort of tax increase to do that. It's making sure that our buildings are designed and maintained in a way that you can extend that asset life. Just like us, when you get middle age, you need to start spending a little bit more on yourself to make sure you go a little bit further. It's the same thing with our buildings. Once they get to a certain age, it's critical that you invest in them so that you can get another 20, 30, 40, 50 years out of them. And if you miss that window, then you're almost at the point where it's time, it doesn't make sense for you to invest any further in it. And it probably makes more sense just to knock it down and build a new one type of thing once you've defined what that scope is. So the assets are everything that the corporation owns, and how do you sort of maintain that asset? From an accounting perspective, you want to reinvest the amount every year that you're depreciating every year in the value of those assets. I haven't seen that analysis yet from Georgian Bluff's perspective. I fear that we're probably not investing as much as quickly in those assets as they're depreciating from an accounting perspective. And so we need to put a whole financial plan in place to make sure that taxpayers' dollars on these investments are being maximized and extended as far as you can.
Thanks, Al. Before I go to Anne, so our assets are, it seems to be mostly like our built environment. Does it include our natural assets? What commitment are we required look at when we think about our trails and our parks and our trees and all of that, that is part of what the municipality also owns and is responsible for.
Thank you. That is an absolute critical question, something that staff have to get their head around. I would venture a guess to say that we haven't done that quantification of what that looks like. It's certainly in our asset pool. It's something that that we have a responsibility, a fiduciary responsibility to maintain and make sure that our liabilities are covered, that we're investing in those assets. I can tell you that it includes more than just trails. It includes sort of public access to waterways. It includes a whole bunch of different things that we need to maintain. We need to keep safe. We need to make sure that we're reinvesting in them so that the public continues to enjoy that. And we need to make sort of those, we need to define what it means in terms of what we want to maintain, the standard we want to maintain it at, what the cost is, and how often we have to sort of go back, do an assessment of those assets and make sure that they're being maintained. So that becomes all part of that whole asset management plan that we need to put together and bring to council so that council endorses it and the council can see what the actual funding requirements are and that we make some important decisions on prioritization of those assets. I fully expect that there's going to be some things that council might look at and say, you know, does this make any sense for us to continue to keep this asset in our portfolio based on utilization rates, based on what the community's thinking? Maybe there's a better investment return if we were to turn around and sell that asset. We have to look at all those things. But in the absence of having that full picture right now, I can't give you a specific answer on what we're doing, but I can tell you that's part of what we're working on in the coming months is in terms of defining that holistic view of all those assets and what we're going to be doing with them.
That's great. Thanks, Al. I mean, when I think about, we often talk about drawing people to our community. And from what I can tell in my limited perspective, what draws people to Georgian Bluffs are not the buildings. It's the natural assets, and it's the beautiful scenery and the trails and the paths and the trees. And so if we, as an organization, don't value those at least the same way as we do, for example, the Shallow Lake Community Center, then we're really doing our municipality a huge injustice. That's just a soapbox that I'll get off of now. And Anne, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you for your soapbox, Kathy. I think that's really important. But I also want to, yes, the natural environment and the beauty of Georgian Bluffs is what draws people here and what keeps people here. But I think we also shouldn't, because we're a climate action committee, we really need to remember that our natural-based assets are a really good natural-based solution to climate change as well. So they need to be protected from that perspective, as well as from the draw perspective.
Good points. Thank you. Al.
This is a great discussion. I think we're going to have a lot more of this even at the council table. And Brittany's probably going to laugh, but I've said this before: is, you know, what does Georgian Bluffs want to be known for? You know, what is our brand that we want to sort of celebrate and advertise out there? Because something came through my desk the other day where there was a request for some advertising, and sort of I sat back and I said, well, what are we advertising? Like, what is it that we want to advertise? To me, you almost have to define what you want to be first, and then you spend money to advertise that and raise that awareness and that brand recognition. So to me, it's almost backwards. You know, we need to define what we want to be first, what we want to be known for, what we want to promote, and then we'll look at the best way to advertise that and promote that. But I think we're still stuck, and we have to define what it is that we want to be. And then we can start looking at potentially advertising and raising that awareness. So I appreciate the conversation. I think we're going to have some more of these conversations in the months to come.
Yeah, those are good comments, Al. I just went to a branding seminar for our Conservation Authority, and that's exactly what process they went through, is what you've described. First, describe what your values are, what is the essence of your organization or your municipality, and then you develop the branding based on that. So those are all excellent points. Anyone else? on the asset management discussion. I didn't even look at that as something I would attend because I saw asset management and I read Cassie. So I appreciate that it's coming back to council, Al, in regards to how we spend our money on workshops and conferences. I would be happy to forego some of my allotment for that kind of education this year for one of the committee members at this table to attend something in my stead. But I don't know if our policy allows for that, but it's certainly something we could think about perhaps in the future.
Sure. I agree 100%. We can certainly look at that. I'm not sure the policy would allow you to do that right now without going to council for approval, but it's interesting you say, you know, you thought asset management, the first thing you thought was our treasurer. And when I think asset management, I don't think our treasurer at all. I think sort of our engineering staff and our construction staff in terms of what that asset looks like. It's in conjunction with finance, because then you've got to sort of put that financial plan together. But I'm a little bit shocked that is the way we do things right now. Is asset management is chaired by our financial folks, which tells me maybe it isn't the best place to be. But we're going to explore all that and we're going to define that. So it's an interesting debate we're going to have.
Yeah, those are good comments. It just shows how little I know about asset management, I guess. I should have kept my mouth shut. Sue.
Thank you. Interesting when you say it's asset management is handled by Treasury, because that's where the information on this conference came from. I'm not going to be able to take it in for the simple reason I'm doing Good Roads on the first 2 days of this one, and there's a huge amount on climate change involved with the Good Roads conference this year. So I'll be getting more than enough information about it, I think. But I think that one's a good one. If anyone was interested, though, in taking this from the committee, Al, could we not make a request to council that it be approved through council, that we would have budget from somewhere? Because I don't imagine any of us spent our full allotment for conference budget last year.
Through the chair to the deputy mayor. So the report that's going forward to council next week, I think. Is it next week, Brittany? I think it's next week.
It's the 17th.
Oh, the 17th. Actually is making a recommendation that committee members be allowed to attend conferences and seminars, and the municipality will pay up to $500 a year for that. We're also recommending that this artificial sort of number of conferences that councillors can attend be dismissed as well. Council sort of has an assigned budget, and if you can attend 50 conferences within that budget, why wouldn't you? There doesn't need to be an artificial number, as long as it's related to the business of the municipality, and as council members, you're operating within your approved budget. You should be able to attend multiple conferences, especially in a year with COVID, where a lot more are seminars and virtual sort of attendees. It's a lot more cost effective. There isn't mileage to be paid and hotels to be paid and things of that sort. So I think the recommendation that's going to council is to sort of do away with that arbitrary cap on the number of conferences and seminars that members of council can attend within the same approved budget number, but also to allow committee members that are citizens the opportunity to attend conferences and seminars up to $500 that the township would endorse and support.
Super. I think that's a great step forward. Yeah, I like that. Okay. Moving on to our additional new business item. Luke, you're going to bring us up to speed on the discussion you had with the CAT team of North Bruce Peninsula and the work they did around their inventory for emissions.
Yeah, I keep it very short, just kind of a debrief. I mentioned that during one of the county meetings, Rod Lehman of Northern Bruce Peninsula mentioned that the committee had taken on the task of preparing an inventory for the corporate assets. So I followed up, and what was actually interesting, they don't have a budget for a consultant. So they basically said, we are a member of PCP, and we have taken it upon ourselves to do a greenhouse gas inventory for the corporate assets. And so I said, what does that mean? And they explained that it's actually pretty straightforward in terms of when it concerns the corporate assets, in terms of it's an analysis of all the energy bills, the fuel costs, power, fleet, basically the hydro, gas, diesel, fuel, and that is information that needs to come from the council regardless. That's what a consultant would also ask the council to produce. So all the work is already done, by the municipality, sorry, not the council. The consultants would typically ask that from the staff. So it's the staff who needs to do the work anyway, in terms of getting all these source documents. And then basically what the consultant would do is, at least that's how it was explained, is take the last 3 years, take an average, and use that average as kind of the numbers you plug into a spreadsheet. And what they said is, okay, we can actually do that fairly easily ourselves, without the help of a consultant, and they would be willing to share their spreadsheets. Apparently, these are all formulas that are, tested and all well known. So it would be merely an effort of getting the documents, analyzing the documents, sticking them into a spreadsheet, and that would then lead to an inventory or a baseline for corporate assets. That's one piece. Then the second piece is, what do you do with the municipal-wide baseline story? And the way they are approaching that is that they said, we know that, backtracking that, we had a presentation from HIBA, where HIBA mentioned that maybe the county has some of that data. So in our case, that may be helpful. But what Northern Bruce Peninsula did is they say, we know what the big ticket items are. What is it? The emissions related to, for example, heating systems. So they will pick a few big ticket items and then focus their policies and their awareness activities on those big ticket items without having necessarily kind of a municipal-wide baseline. First, because it's difficult to do, and you would need to have consultants to implement that. Second, because they said, we know what the low-hanging fruit is. So let's focus on those 3 or 4 particular interventions. For example, each air source heat systems, heat pumps, things like that, and see to what extent we can increase awareness amongst our amongst the population, but also provide some incentives to change behavior. So they basically quantifiable baseline where it concerns corporate resources, but then basically a more policy awareness based approach towards impacts that affect the broader municipality. And of course, we didn't really talk about, bylaws and planning standards and, the things that developers that we can work with through the planning department. But that's basically where they're at. So I came away from the fact that, okay, first of all, I'm not really aware. There's a few questions. One is this the same thing as the energy audit that Georgian Bluffs already went through, or is this different? Second is, and that's maybe John can respond to that. To what extent would this comply with the requirements of any PCP funding or opportunities that we would have? I don't know to what extent this can all be done. To what extent there need to be some kind of a formal process that where a consultant must be involved in order to meet these funding requirements. And I'm not aware of that. I just wanted to learn a little bit more about how they do it in Northern Bruce Peninsula. So that's kind of a quick and dirty report on where they're at, and I can share at some point the spreadsheets and the formulas that they are using, if that's of use to the staff. And then if there's any interest, then we can have a follow-up, a more detailed. This was a short conversation, but it may be worth at some point to actually have a follow-up conversation to say, well, what are what are the nuts and bolts of taking an approach? How much time did it cost? And what kind of data do you actually do you need? They also mentioned they had some local experts, so they felt a little bit more confident that they would be able to pull this off. But again, that would be part of the network that we have access to say, well, who are those people, and can we connect them to the staff in Georgian Bluffs and basically learn from the steps they have taken. So that's the short report. And as soon as I have more information, and particularly the spreadsheets and the kind of the tools that go with it, I will share that.
That's great. Good to know, Luke. And anything we can consider doing sort of in-house, especially if we already have the data that staff have access to, then I think it'll be a better sell to the community as well. So we'll look to get more of that information. In the meantime, does anyone have any questions about that for Luke? I did have one. So I think, and maybe I've forgotten, but Zach presented to us a couple of meetings ago or more with was it called the Energy Management Master Plan? And was that still in draft form, or is that, where were we going with that? And does anyone remember the name of that plan that he presented? Do you recall us talking about that? It had a great big long title, and I think it was still in draft form, and I was just wondering what the intent is for that report going forward. Do you recall, Brittany?
So I haven't pulled it up yet, but I do recall what you're speaking of in reference to what Zach did present. And without having it in front of me, I don't recall the exact name of it, but I do believe it was some form of an energy audit. And it was in response to, again, unspecific, some kind of provincial regulation that had come into effect that required us to do so. You're correct. I believe it still is in draft form. It was presented to council, but I'm unsure that it was ever appropriately adopted. So I do believe that that energy audit is a couple of years old. So I'm unsure that the information contained within the document is relatively what we need it to be to tackle this in 2021. But we will look at the information that's included there and see if we can find some cost savings associated to completion of another review in 2021 or whenever we get around to it with the consultant.
Yeah, no, you're right. The data is probably outdated by now. It'll be interesting too when Luke talks about taking an average of the last 3 years. I imagine last year for most of it, and for a large part of this year with the impacts on energy use with the pandemic, I wonder how how a consultant would treat that data. Is that considered an outlier and you take it out of the equation? But it's certainly something to keep in mind as we move forward. Thanks, Brittany. Any other questions? Anne?
Yeah, I think that report was in draft and it was 2018. And the energy audit that was done was based on, I think, assets, buildings. It did not include operations, so it didn't include the kind of roadwork, the fleet, and all of that kind of stuff. So it was a partial energy audit.
Got it. Okay, so it sounds like not something that we can use going forward for a couple of reasons. Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you, Luke, for bringing that back to us, and we'll look to seeing some of those, the templates at least in the future, and drawing on their experience to help us move forward.
Sure.
Okay, I think I've got, is that everything then, Brittany? We didn't have any other items added? Okay, no notices of motion, no closed session. So we just need to discuss the date of our next regular meeting. Are we looking at a month down the road at this point, or what seems reasonable? Anne?
Well, I'm trying to remember what Al said in terms of the timing of getting material to kind of move forward with information for council. Al, you had some dates that you mentioned as targets for that, and whether we need to be aware of those as we plan our next meeting date, because it feels like there's some planning that needs to happen to go into that.
Yeah.
If I may, through the chair, the date that we talked about was a February 17th date where there's going to be a budget preview given to council in terms of some of the inputs that we've had, some of the feedback from our resident survey that we did, some of the initial inputs into the budget, and some of the budgetary pressures we're having. So I was hoping that I could get a draft report to this committee within the next couple of weeks so that you can start reviewing sort of my draft in terms of trying to raise the awareness of councillors in terms of the initiative, the importance of adopting a climate action plan, and some initial thoughts that we talked about. So I would suspect if this council is okay, or if this committee is okay, that we schedule a meeting probably towards the end of February. So that, because council will not start their budget deliberations until either the end of March or beginning of April. It depends on some of those other inputs that we talked about. So I would suspect the end of this month, beginning of March would be an ideal time for us to get together. You'll have that draft of my report that we could sort of review. It might be accompanied with a presentation as well, and we can all have some input into that in our attempt to raise some councillors' awareness and education, and then we can schedule sort of an opportunity for them to have a question and answer period as well.
Okay, thanks, Al. So that would land us on either the 26th of February or the 5th of March. Do committee members have a preference?
Councillor Coburn, if I could just interject for one moment. I would recommend the 26th of February simply to align with agenda approvals internally with staff to get Al's report on a council agenda.
Okay, perfect. If that's okay with folks, then let's say the next meeting for this committee will be Friday, February 26th at 10 a.m. And Al.
Sorry, I don't want to bring a wrench into this. 26th, I've got something in regards to economic development, and then something in regards to the water treatment plant as well in the morning. So my morning is completely booked. I was hoping if we could do it in the afternoon, not too late on a Friday afternoon. I don't want to keep everyone late on a Friday afternoon, but maybe right after lunch, if that would be possible. That would fit in nicely.
Does 1 o'clock that afternoon work for people, Anne?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So yeah, it would just mean touching base with John and letting him know of the date and time if someone wouldn't mind doing that. Okay, so Friday, February 26th at 1 p.m. it is. And if there's no other discussion, I just need a motion to adjourn the meeting today. Thank you, Danuta. All in favor? And meeting adjourned. Thanks everyone for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Kathy.
Okay.
Enjoy
Thanks
your
a lot.
weekend, everyone.
Too.
Thank you.
Thank you.